The storm brought them together, but fate tore them apart. As lightning cracked the Montana sky in the autumn of 1878, Zachary Thornton clutched her reins with white knuckles, desperate to find shelter before nightfall. The young woman had been traveling for days, her belongings reduced to what would fit in her saddlebags after the stagecoach accident that had left her stranded. Her dark hair whipped wildly around her face as the wind picked up, bringing with it the distinct scent of rain and trouble. Clayton Foster first spotted her from the second-story window of his modest ranch house, a lone figure battling the elements as she approached. At 26, he'd already carved out a respectable spread in Paradise Valley. Though respectable was a generous term for the endless work and modest returns that defined his existence. His weathered hands gripped the window frame as he watched her struggle against the strengthening gale, her horse growing increasingly skittish as thunder rumbled overhead. "Joseph," Clayton called to his ranch hand, "saddle up. We've got a traveler about to get caught in this squall." The rain began in earnest just as Clayton reached her, water cascading from the brim of his hat as he guided his horse alongside hers. "Madam, you're welcome to wait out this storm at my ranch. It's just over that rise." Zara, to those who knew her well, looked up with relief flooding her eyes. "I would be most grateful, sir. I fear my journey has become rather more adventurous than I anticipated." Clayton noted her refined speech, the quality of her riding clothes despite their travel-worn state. She was clearly not from Montana territory. Her accent carried hints of Boston or perhaps New York. As they rode toward the ranch house, he found himself stealing glances at her profile, strong yet delicate, with a determined set to her jaw that suggested she was a woman accustomed to handling difficulties. "I'm Clayton Foster," he offered as they approached the modest two-story structure that served as both his home and the heart of his operation. "This here's the Sunrise Ranch." "Zachary Thornton," she replied, then added with a small smile, "though most call me Zara." Clayton helped her dismount, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. Their eyes met briefly before a crack of thunder sent her horse dancing sideways, breaking the moment. "Let's get you inside, Miss Thornton. Joseph will see to your horse." The warmth of Clayton's home enveloped Zara as she stepped through the door, removing her soaked riding coat. The main room was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and practical furniture, arranged for conversation rather than show. A bookshelf stood in one corner, surprisingly well stocked for a ranch house in the territories. "You're welcome to warm yourself by the fire," Clayton said, stoking the flames higher. "I'll fetch you something dry to wear. My sister left some things behind when she married and moved to Bozeman." Zara nodded gratefully, moving closer to the crackling fire. "Your kindness is appreciated, Mr. Foster. I had hoped to reach Livingston before the storm hit." "Livingston?" Clayton raised an eyebrow. "That's still a good 15 miles. What business brings a lady like yourself out this way alone?" Zara hesitated, her fingers working at the buttons of her riding gloves. "I've accepted a position as the new schoolteacher there. The stagecoach that was carrying me suffered a broken axle yesterday morning, and rather than wait days for repairs, I decided to continue on horseback. The driver assured me it was a straightforward journey." Clayton chuckled. "Straightforward if you know the country and the weather. Spring storms like this one can appear with little warning." He disappeared briefly up the stairs, returning with a simple dress and shawl. "These should fit well enough. The washroom is through there if you'd like to change." When Zara emerged some minutes later, Clayton had prepared a simple meal of stew that had been simmering since morning. The dress, though a bit loose around her slender frame, suited her well, its deep blue fabric complementing her eyes in a way that didn't escape Clayton's notice. "You're fortunate to have found shelter," Clayton commented as they ate. "These storms can last for days sometimes." "Days." Zara's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "But I'm expected in Livingston tomorrow. The school term begins next week and there are preparations to be made." Clayton shook his head. "I'm afraid the creek between here and town will be flooded by morning. Even if the rain stops, you won't be crossing until the water recedes." Disappointment crossed Zara's face, followed by resignation. "I suppose I'll have to impose on your hospitality a bit longer then." "It's no imposition," Clayton assured her, surprised by how much he meant it. "It's not often I have company out here beyond the ranch hands." As darkness fell completely outside and the storm showed no signs of abating, they talked by firelight. Clayton shared stories of establishing his ranch 4 years earlier after working as a cattle driver throughout his early 20s. Zara spoke of her teaching position in Boston, which she had left to seek adventure and independence in the West. "My parents were scandalized," she admitted with a small laugh. "A single woman of 23 traveling alone to Montana Territory. They predicted disaster at every turn." "And has it been disastrous?" Clayton asked, genuinely curious. Zara considered the question, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "No," she finally said. "Challenging, certainly. Unexpected, absolutely, but not disastrous." She looked up at him. "Until today, perhaps, when I foolishly thought I could outride a storm." "Sometimes the unexpected turns aren't disasters," Clayton said softly. "Sometimes they're just different paths than the ones we plan to take." The night deepened around them, and Clayton showed Zara to his sister's old room upstairs. "Sleep well, Miss Thornton. We'll assess the situation in the morning. Thank you, Mr. Foster, for everything." Her hand briefly touched his arm, a gesture of gratitude that sent warmth through him that had nothing to do with the fire downstairs. Morning brought confirmation of Clayton's prediction. The creek had indeed flooded, making passage to Livingston impossible. What Clayton hadn't anticipated was that the storm would continue for 3 more days, trapping Zara at Sunrise Ranch far longer than either had expected. Those days established a rhythm between them. Clayton continued his necessary ranch work despite the weather, and Zara, unwilling to be idle, helped with indoor tasks, mending, cooking, and organizing Clayton's haphazard collection of books and papers. In the evenings, they would talk for hours, discovering shared interests in literature and music. Clayton revealed that before coming west, he had studied briefly at a university in St. Louis, abandoning formal education when the call of open country became too strong to resist. "I've always believed education happens everywhere," Zara told him on the 3rd night as they sat before the fire, the rain still pattering steadily on the roof. "The classroom is just one setting for it." "Is that what drew you to teaching?" Clayton asked, pouring her another cup of coffee. "Partly," she admitted, "but also the desire to shape young minds, to open doors they might not know exist." She paused, looking into her cup. "My father wanted me to marry well and settle into Boston society. Teaching was my compromise, respectable enough for a woman, but offering some measure of independence. And Montana, that seems more rebellion than compromise," Clayton observed with a smile. Zara laughed, the sound warming the room more effectively than the fire. "Perhaps. But I've always been drawn to places with room to breathe." Boston felt confining. On the 4th morning, they awoke to sunshine and the welcome sound of receding waters. By midday, Joseph confirmed that the creek had subsided enough to cross safely. Clayton found himself strangely reluctant to deliver this news. "I can escort you to Livingston tomorrow," he told Zara as they walked along the edge of the pasture that afternoon, the ground still soft beneath their boots. The road should be passable by then. "Thank you," Zara said, though he detected a note of hesitation in her voice. "You've been extraordinarily kind, Mr. Foster." "Clayton," he corrected gently. "After 4 days under my roof, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Clayton," she repeated, smiling up at him. "And I'm Zara." They paused at the fence line, looking out over the valley where wildflowers had already begun to emerge following the rain. The mountains in the distance were crowned with fresh snow, gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. "It's beautiful here," Zara said softly. "I can see why you chose this place." Clayton nodded, acutely aware of her presence beside him, of the scent of lavender that somehow lingered in her hair despite days away from any luxuries. "I felt it the first time I rode through this valley, like I'd found the place I was meant to be." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of connection that had formed with surprising speed and depth. Clayton found himself wondering what it would be like if she stayed, if the schoolhouse she taught in was closer, if circumstances were different. "Zara, he began, but was interrupted by Joseph calling from the barn, needing his attention for some ranch matter. The moment passed, and though they spent one more evening together, some invisible barrier had formed the knowledge of her imminent departure, creating a restraint that hadn't existed before. The next morning, Clayton helped Zara mount her freshly rested horse, her belongings securely repacked. He would accompany her to Livingston to ensure she arrived safely, though the journey would take only a few hours in good weather. "Ready?" he asked, swinging into his own saddle. "Yes," she replied, though her eyes suggested otherwise. They rode mostly in companionable silence, commenting occasionally on the landscape or sharing observations about the wildlife they encountered. As they approached the outskirts of Livingston, Zara reined her horse to a stop on a rise overlooking the town. "Before we arrive and I become Miss Thornton, the new schoolteacher again," she began, then hesitated. Clayton waited, heart beating faster than the easy ride warranted. "I wanted to thank you properly," she continued, "not just for the shelter and guidance, but for the conversations. For making me feel," she searched for the right word, "welcome, in this territory and in your home." Clayton removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "The welcome was genuine, Zara, and it remains open. Livingston isn't so far that you couldn't ride out to Sunrise Ranch when school isn't in session." Hope flickered in her eyes. "I would like that very much." They rode into town side by side, drawing curious glances from the locals who had been expecting their new teacher days earlier. The school board representative, Mr. Hammond, greeted Zara with relief at the small hotel where she would stay until more permanent lodgings could be arranged. "We were beginning to worry, Miss Thornton," Hammond said, eyeing Clayton with curiosity. "Mr. Foster provided shelter during the storm," Zara explained, "and guided me safely to town afterward. I'm indebted to his kindness." "Foster," Hammond nodded in recognition. "Good man, fine ranch you're building out there." Clayton acknowledged the compliment with a tip of his hat before turning to Zara. "Miss Thornton, it's been a pleasure. I wish you success with your teaching position." Their farewell was formal, constrained by the public setting and watching eyes, but Zara's fingers lingered in his as they shook hands. "Thank you again, Mr. Foster. I hope our paths cross again soon." "Sooner than you might think," he replied quietly, with a smile meant only for her. Over the following weeks, Clayton found reasons to visit Livingston more frequently than his ranch business strictly required. He would time his arrivals to coincide with the end of the school day, casually appearing outside the small schoolhouse as Zara dismissed her students. These meetings evolved into walks through town, meals at the hotel restaurant, and eventually, invitations for Zara to visit Sunrise Ranch on Saturdays when her teaching duties allowed. Spring blossomed fully into summer, and with it, their relationship grew from friendship into something deeper. On a warm July evening, as they sat on the porch of Clayton's ranch house, watching fireflies emerge at dusk, he finally gave voice to feelings that had been building since that stormy April night. "I've never met anyone like you, Zara," he said, taking her hand in his. "These past months have been the happiest I can remember." Zara squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the last golden light of sunset. "I came west seeking adventure and independence I never expected to find. This, Clayton prompted, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "A man who values my mind as much as my company, a place that feels more like home than anywhere I've lived before." She paused, gathering courage, feelings I've never experienced until now. Clayton leaned forward, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "May I kiss you, Zara Thornton?" Her answer came not in words but in the slight forward tilt of her head, the closing of her eyes as their lips met for the first time. The kiss was gentle, tentative at first, then deepening with shared emotion that had built over months of knowing glances and careful touches. When they finally parted, Clayton kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm falling in love with you," he whispered. "I think I have been since that first night by the fire." Zara's hand came up to touch his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "I've been falling right alongside you, Clayton Foster." Their courtship progressed through the summer and into autumn, becoming the subject of gentle gossip in Livingston. The handsome rancher and the eastern schoolteacher made an appealing pair, and most townspeople approved of the match. Zara continued teaching, maintaining her independence while weaving her life increasingly with Clayton's. In October, 6 months after their first meeting, Clayton proposed during a picnic at the spot where they had paused on their ride into Livingston. Kneeling before her with a simple gold ring that had belonged to his grandmother, he asked Zara to share his life, his ranch, his future. "Yes," she answered without hesitation, tears of joy brightening her eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes, Clayton, I will marry you." They planned a December wedding, choosing to marry during the school's winter break. Zara wrote to her parents in Boston, expecting disapproval but receiving instead a cautious blessing and promises to visit in the spring when travel would be easier. Clayton expanded the ranch house, adding rooms in anticipation of their shared life and the family they hoped to create. On their wedding day, snow blanketed Paradise Valley, transforming Sunrise Ranch into a winter wonderland. They exchanged vows in the town church, surrounded by Zara's students, Clayton's ranch hands, and the townspeople who had embraced them both. Zara wore a cream-colored dress that she had ordered from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that caught the candlelight as she and Clayton joined hands before the minister. "I take you, Zachary Thornton, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Clayton said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "To have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, for richer or poorer in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." Zara repeated the vows, her voice clear and confident as she promised herself to the man who had captured her heart during a spring storm. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Clayton's kiss sealed their commitment as the church erupted in applause. Their first months of marriage were a blissful adjustment to shared life. Zara continued teaching through the winter term while settling into her role as mistress of Sunrise Ranch. Clayton marveled at how seamlessly she balanced both worlds, bringing her educator's organization to the ranch books while maintaining her connection with her students in town. By spring, they had established routines that honored both their individual pursuits and their life together. Clayton expanded his cattle operation with Zara's encouragement, while she introduced new teaching methods that earned praise from even the most traditional families in Livingston. In April, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Clayton surprised Zara with a picnic by the creek that had once flooded to keep them together. As they spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree just beginning to leaf out, Zara took her husband's hand with unusual solemnity. "I have something to tell you," she said, her eyes holding a secret joy. Clayton's heart quickened. "What is it, my love?" "By Christmas, there will be 3 of us at Sunrise Ranch." She placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a child, Clayton." His breath caught as understanding dawned. "A baby? You're certain?" Zara nodded, laughing at the wonder spreading across his face. "Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to tell you here where our story truly began." Clayton gathered her in his arms, his joy too great for words. That night, as they lay together in their bed, he placed gentle kisses on her stomach, whispering promises to their unborn child about horses to ride, stars to count, and parents who would love them more than anything in the world. Summer passed with Zara's body changing gradually, her teaching becoming more challenging as her pregnancy progressed. By mutual agreement, she decided to resign her position after the fall term, planning to focus on motherhood while nurturing dreams of eventually starting a small school at the ranch for their child and the children of neighboring homesteads. As autumn painted the valley in golds and reds, Clayton noticed a subtle shift in Zara's demeanor, a wistfulness that occasionally shadowed her usual cheerfulness. When he asked about it one evening as they sat by the fire, her hand resting on her now prominent belly, she confessed to feelings she'd been reluctant to share. "I love our life, Clayton. Please never doubt that," she began carefully. "But sometimes I wonder about my parents, about Boston. They've never seen our home, never met you except through my letters, and now they may never meet their grandchild." Clayton considered her words, understanding the pull of family even across vast distances. "Would you like to visit them, after the baby comes and is strong enough to travel?" Zara's eyes widened. "You would consider that, traveling all the way to Boston? For you, I would consider crossing oceans," he said simply. "Besides, I'm curious about the world that produced such an extraordinary woman." Relief and gratitude softened her features. "Thank you for understanding. Perhaps next summer, when the baby is a few months old." The plan gave Zara comfort as winter approached and her time grew nearer. December brought heavy snows that sometimes isolated the ranch for days at a time, but Clayton had prepared well, ensuring they had ample supplies and that Dr. Miller knew to check on them whenever possible. On the evening of December 18th, 1879, precisely 1 year after their wedding, Zara's labor began. Clayton sent Joseph riding through the snowbound night to fetch the doctor while he remained at his wife's side, trying to hide his fear behind encouraging words and gentle touches. "You're doing wonderfully," he assured her as the contractions intensified. "Dr. Miller will be here soon." Zara gripped his hand with surprising strength. "This baby isn't waiting for anyone, Clayton. It's coming now." And she was right. Their son entered the world in the early hours of December 19th, delivered by Clayton's trembling hands under Zara's remarkably calm instruction. The doctor arrived an hour later to find the new father cradling his son while Zara rested, exhausted but radiant. "You've done well, Foster," Dr. Miller commented after examining both mother and child. "A fine, healthy boy you have there." Clayton could scarcely believe the tiny perfection of his son, with Zara's dark hair and what already seemed to be his own determined chin. They named him William, after Clayton's father, with Thomas as his middle name in honor of Zara's family. The winter passed in a blur of sleepless nights and indescribable joy as they adjusted to parenthood. William Billy, as they came to call him, thrived under their devoted care, growing stronger each day. By spring, he was smiling and reaching for his father's face, clearly recognizing the man who sang to him each night. As the snow receded and travel became easier, Zara began making plans for their journey east. She wrote to her parents, announcing their intention to visit in July, introducing them by letter to their grandson and the husband they had yet to meet. The response came swiftly: an enthusiastic welcome and detailed suggestions for their stay. Clayton watched as Zara read the letter aloud, her face alight with anticipation. Though he had reservations about the long journey with an infant, he kept them to himself, unwilling to dampen her happiness. As spring progressed into early summer, however, unsettling news began reaching Paradise Valley. Reports of conflict between settlers and indigenous tribes further north had heightened tensions throughout the territory. Railroad construction had pushed into traditional hunting grounds, and skirmishes were becoming more frequent. "Perhaps we should postpone our trip," Clayton suggested one evening as they discussed the latest reports, "just until things settle down." Zara cradled Billy against her shoulder, patting his back as he drifted to sleep. "The troubles are far from our route," she countered, "and we would be traveling by train most of the way. We'll be perfectly safe." Clayton knew her heart was set on the journey, on reconciling the two halves of her life, the Boston upbringing and the Montana future. "We'll proceed as planned then," he agreed, "but we'll stay alert and change course if necessary." Their preparations continued, with Zara sewing new clothes for all three of them, while Clayton arranged for Joseph to manage the ranch in their absence. By early July, they were ready to depart, their trunks packed and arrangements made for the long journey east. The morning of their departure dawned clear and warm. Clayton loaded their belongings into the wagon that would take them to the train station in Livingston, his movements methodical despite the knot of anxiety in his stomach. Zara moved about the house with 6-month-old Billy in her arms, saying goodbye to the rooms that had become so dear to her. "We'll be back before you know it," Clayton assured her, seeing the mixed emotions in her eyes. "The ranch will be waiting for us." The journey to Livingston was uneventful, the familiar landscape rolling by as Billy slept in his mother's arms. At the station, they found unexpected commotion. A larger-than-usual crowd gathered around the station master, voices raised in concern. Clayton handed the reins to Joseph and approached the group, leaving Zara with the wagon and their son. He returned moments later, his expression grave. "The train has been delayed," he explained. "There's been an incident near the Yellowstone Crossing bridge, damage that needs repair before service can resume." Zara's face fell. "How long?" "At least 3 days, possibly longer." Clayton ran a hand through his hair, weighing their options. "We could return to the ranch and wait, or stay in town until the train arrives." After discussion, they decided to remain in Livingston, taking rooms at the hotel where they had once shared meals during their courtship. The delay stretched from 3 days into a week, as reports of the damage proved worse than initially thought. Clayton sent Joseph back to the ranch with instructions, resigned to the extended wait. On the 8th day, as they breakfasted in the hotel dining room, a messenger arrived with a telegram for Clayton. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Zara asked, immediately concerned. Clayton handed her the paper. "It's from the railroad company. The line won't reopen for at least another 2 weeks. They're suggesting passengers find alternative routes or postpone travel." Zara's disappointment was palpable. 2 more weeks, but my parents are expecting us next week. They've planned everything. We could send a telegram explaining the delay, Clayton suggested. Or, he hesitated, knowing his next words might upset her. We could consider returning home and postponing the trip until next year. Zara was silent for a long moment, absently stroking Billy's cheek as he sat in her lap. "No," she finally said, her voice firm. "We've come this far. We'll find another way." The other way materialized in the form of a stagecoach line that ran east to connect with a different railroad route. It would add days to their journey and involve more difficult travel, but it would get them to Boston, albeit later than planned. Clayton had reservations about the stagecoach. The rough travel would be hard on Billy, and the routes were less protected than the main rail lines. But Zara was determined, and he reluctantly agreed to the new plan. They departed Livingston by stagecoach the next morning, their belongings reduced to what could reasonably be carried in the cramped conveyance. The first day passed without incident, though Billy was fussier than usual, disturbed by the constant motion and unfamiliar surroundings. On the second day, as they passed through a remote stretch of high country, disaster struck. The lead horse stumbled on loose rocks, sending the coach lurching dangerously close to the edge of the road where it hugged a steep hillside. The driver managed to halt before catastrophe, but the damage was done. The horse was injured, and one of the coach's wheels had cracked against a boulder. The passengers disembarked while the driver assessed the situation. Clayton held Billy, who was mercifully asleep despite the commotion, while Zara stood nearby, her face pale with the realization of how close they had come to serious harm. "We can't continue," the driver announced after inspection. "Not until I get a replacement wheel and horse. I'll need to ride to the next station and bring back help." "How long will that take?" another passenger asked. "A day, maybe 2. The driver squinted at the sky. "You folks should make camp here. There's water in that creek yonder, and you should be safe enough if you stay together." Clayton exchanged glances with Zara, reading the dismay in her eyes. "We'll manage," he assured her, though privately he was beginning to believe their journey was ill-fated. The driver departed with the uninjured lead horse, leaving the passengers to establish a makeshift camp. Clayton used his ranching skills to organize the group, assigning tasks and establishing a watch rotation. As night fell, they gathered around a small fire, sharing provisions and uneasy conversation. Zara sat close to Clayton, Billy bundled against the mountain chill in her arms. "Perhaps you were right," she whispered. "Perhaps we should have waited." Clayton put his arm around her shoulders. "We couldn't have known. Sometimes the path forward isn't clear until we're already on it." The next morning brought unexpected visitors, a small hunting party from a Crow encampment in the valley below. Their leader, introducing himself in careful English as Running Elk, explained that they had seen the disabled coach and come to offer assistance. Clayton, who had dealt fairly with indigenous people throughout his years in the territory, welcomed their help. Through a combination of sign language and broken English, he explained their situation. Running Elk nodded in understanding and conferred with his companions. "We help," he finally said. "Take woman and child to our camp, safer there. Men stay with coach." A debate ensued among the passengers, some reluctant to separate or to trust the Crow. Clayton pulled Zara aside, speaking quietly. "I think we should accept their offer," he said. "The camp will be more comfortable for you and Billy than this roadside, especially if the driver is delayed." Zara looked uncertain. "I don't want to be separated from you." "It would only be temporary," Clayton assured her, "and Billy's safety must come first." After further discussion, they agreed. Zara, Billy, and the one other female passenger would go to the Crow camp, while Clayton and the remaining men stayed with the coach. Running Elk promised to send braves back with food and water for those who remained. The separation was difficult, with Clayton holding his son close before helping Zara mount behind one of the hunters. "I'll come for you as soon as the coach is repaired," he promised. "Keep Billy close and don't worry." Zara nodded bravely, though her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "We'll be waiting." Clayton watched them descend the trail into the valley, fighting the instinct to follow, to keep his family within sight. But reason prevailed. Billy would be safer and more comfortable in the camp than on the exposed hillside. The day passed slowly, with Clayton pacing the roadside, scanning the horizon for any sign of the returning driver. When night fell again with no relief in sight, his worry deepened. The promised braves arrived with provisions, reporting that Zara and Billy were safe in the camp, being well cared for by the women there. "Wife make medicine for baby," one brave explained, mimicking rocking a child. "Good medicine. Baby sleep." Clayton was comforted by this news, though confused by the reference to medicine. Perhaps Billy had become feverish. He considered going to the camp himself, but knew someone needed to remain with the coach and explain the situation when help arrived. Dawn of the third day finally brought the driver returning with a repair crew and fresh horses. By midday, the coach was serviceable again, though the passengers were advised that they would need to travel slowly until reaching the next proper station. "I need to collect my wife and son from the Crow camp," Clayton told the driver as the others reboarded. The driver scratched his head. "That'll delay us further. The company won't like that." "Then the company can refund our fare," Clayton replied firmly. "I'm not leaving without my family." Reluctantly, the driver agreed to wait while Clayton rode one of the fresh horses down to the valley, guided by the brave who had brought provisions. The Crow camp was larger than Clayton had expected, with perhaps 30 lodges arranged in a traditional circle. Children played among the structures while women worked at cooking fires or tanning hides. Clayton dismounted at the edge of the camp, respectfully waiting to be acknowledged before entering further. Running Elk emerged from a large central lodge, raising a hand in greeting. "Foster," he called. "Come." Clayton followed him through the camp, noticing the curious but not unfriendly glances of the residents. Running Elk led him to a smaller lodge near the creek, gesturing for him to enter. Inside, Clayton found Zara sitting cross-legged on a buffalo robe, grinding something in a small stone mortar. She looked up as he entered, her face lighting with relief. "Clayton, thank goodness." She set aside her task and moved to embrace him. "Is the coach repaired?" "Yes, it's waiting." "Where's Billy?" Clayton asked, not seeing their son. Zara turned toward a small cradle board nearby where Billy slept peacefully. "He developed a fever yesterday," she explained quietly. "Rising Dove, Running Elk's wife, showed me how to prepare a tea from willow bark. It's brought his temperature down wonderfully." Clayton knelt beside his son, placing a gentle hand on the boy's forehead. Indeed, he felt cool to the touch, his breathing even and undisturbed. "You've been well cared for," he observed, relief evident in his voice. "More than that," Zara said earnestly. "I've learned so much in just these 2 days. Rising Dove has shown me plants for healing, methods for carrying babies that free the hands for work. Their knowledge is remarkable, Clayton." Clayton smiled at the familiar enthusiasm in her voice, the same passion that made her an exceptional teacher. "We should thank them properly before we leave." They gathered their few belongings, and Zara carefully wrapped Billy in the softer blanket Rising Dove had given her. Outside, Clayton offered trading knives and tobacco to Running Elk as thanks for his people's hospitality, while Zara embraced Rising Dove, promising to remember her teachings. "You come back," Rising Dove said in halting English. Teach our children words on paper. We teach your son ways of the people. Zara's eyes brightened at the unexpected proposal. I would be honored, she replied, looking to Clayton for his reaction. He nodded, understanding that connections like these bridges between different worlds were rare and valuable. We will return, he promised, when the summer grass is high again. Their return to the stagecoach was met with impatience from some passengers, but relief from others who had worried about the young family. The journey resumed, moving eastward at a cautious pace until they reached the next station, where they transferred to a more reliable coach. 2 days later, they finally connected with the alternate rail line, boarding a train that would carry them the remaining distance to Boston. As the train pulled away from the station, Clayton found Zara unusually quiet, gazing out the window at the changing landscape. What are you thinking? He asked softly, shifting Billy to his other arm as the baby began to stir from his nap. I'm thinking about choices, she replied. About the paths that lead us to unexpected places. She turned to look at him. If that storm hadn't come the day we met, if the coach wheel hadn't broken, if we hadn't been helped by the crow, how different our story might be. Clayton considered this. Different, yes. But I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some connections are meant to be, regardless of the path. Zara smiled, leaning against his shoulder. I like that thought, that we would have found each other in any version of our lives. The remainder of their journey passed without further incident, though it was clear that the extended travel had taken a toll on all of them, especially Billy. By the time they arrived in Boston, 2 weeks later than planned, they were exhausted but relieved to have reached their destination. The reunion with Zara's parents was emotional and joyful. Thomas and Alina Thornton welcomed them into their Beacon Hill home with open arms, their initial reservations about their daughter's Western husband forgotten in the delight of meeting their grandson. He has your eyes, Zachary, Alina marveled, using her daughter's full name as she had always done. But that strong jaw is all Clayton. Thomas Thornton, a distinguished banker with silver at his temples, shook Clayton's hand firmly. You've done well by our daughter, Foster. I can see it in how she looks at you. Their 3-week stay in Boston was a whirlwind of family gatherings, introductions to Zara's childhood friends, and explorations of the city. Clayton, initially uncomfortable amid the wealth and refinement of Beacon Hill society, gradually relaxed as he found genuine acceptance from the Thorntons and their circle. They're not what I expected, he admitted to Zara one night as they prepared for bed in the elegant guest room. Your father especially. I thought he'd view me as some uncouth frontiersman who stole his daughter away. Zara laughed softly. Father has always valued character above circumstance, and Mother is simply grateful that I'm happy. She paused, brushing her hair before the mirror. Though I think they're both secretly plotting to convince us to move back east. Clayton raised an eyebrow. And how would you feel about that? About returning to this life? Zara set down her brush and turned to face him. This isn't my life anymore, Clayton. It's my past. My life, our life, is at Sunrise Ranch, with the mountains on the horizon and room to breathe. She came to sit beside him on the bed. Though I will admit, indoor plumbing has its advantages. Clayton laughed, pulling her close. Maybe we can bring a bit of Boston convenience to Montana. As their visit drew to a close, Thomas Thornton made a surprising proposal over breakfast one morning. I've been thinking, he began, setting aside his newspaper. Your ranch operation sounds promising, Clayton. With the right investment, you could expand significantly. Clayton looked up from helping Billy with a spoonful of porridge. Sir, I'm offering financial backing, Thomas clarified. A partnership of sorts. You provide the expertise and management, I provide capital for expansion. We both benefit." Clayton was momentarily speechless, looking to Zara for her reaction. She appeared as surprised as he was. "That's extremely generous," Clayton finally responded. "But I wouldn't want you to feel obligated because of Zara and Billy." Thomas shook his head. "This isn't about obligation. It's about opportunity. I've made my fortune recognizing sound investments, and from what you've described, Sunrise Ranch has tremendous potential. Besides," he added with a smile, "I like the idea of having a reason to visit Montana regularly." The offer was tempting. With proper funding, Clayton could implement improvements he'd only dreamed of: better breeding stock, expanded grazing lands, perhaps even the small school Zara envisioned for the children of the valley. "I'll need to consider the details carefully," Clayton said. "But in principle, I'm interested." "Thank you, sir." By the time they departed Boston, preliminary agreements had been sketched out, with formal papers to follow by mail. Zara Thornton tearfully embraced her grandson, extracting promises from Zara to write more frequently and to send photographs whenever possible. "And you'll come for Christmas next year," she insisted. "All of you. No arguments." The return journey to Montana was mercifully smoother than their eastward trip, though still lengthy and tiring. As they finally crossed back into Paradise Valley, the familiar sight of the mountains brought a sense of homecoming that neither had fully appreciated until they'd been away. Joseph met them at the Livingston station with the wagon, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of them. "Ranch is all in order, boss," he reported as he helped with their luggage, "though the house has been quiet without you folks." The drive to Sunrise Ranch felt like the final exhale after months of held breath. As they crested the rise that revealed the ranch buildings nestled in the valley below, Clayton reached for Zara's hand. "Welcome home," he said simply. The months that followed brought changes to Sunrise Ranch. With Thomas Thornton's investment, Clayton was able to purchase adjoining land, doubling his grazing capacity. New breeding stock arrived from as far away as Texas, and additional hands were hired to manage the expanding operation. Zara threw herself into improvements to the ranch house, adding the indoor plumbing she had jokingly mentioned in Boston, and establishing a small classroom in what had once been a storage room. By spring, she had begun teaching the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders 3 days a week, fulfilling her dream of bringing education to the valley. True to their promise, they also made a journey to the Crow encampment when summer came, bringing gifts and accepting the hospitality of running elk and rising dove. Zara spent days learning more of the tribe's healing practices, while sharing her knowledge of reading and writing with interested members of the community. Billy, now walking and beginning to talk, became a favorite among the Crow children, who delighted in teaching him their games and simple words in their language. As autumn approached again, bringing with it Billy's first birthday, Zara and Clayton found themselves reflecting on the eventful year that had passed since their Boston journey. They sat on the porch one evening after putting Billy to bed, watching the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "I received a letter from my mother today," Zara mentioned, leaning against Clayton's shoulder. "They're looking forward to our Christmas visit." Clayton nodded, his arm comfortably around her waist. "It will be good to see them again, and to show them how much Billy has grown." Zara was quiet for a moment, her fingers absently twisting the wedding ring on her left hand. "Clayton, there's something I need to tell you." He turned to look at her, recognizing the same tone she had used by the creek when she'd told him about Billy. "What is it?" "Our family will be growing again," she said softly. "By next summer." Joy spread across Clayton's face as he gathered her into his arms. "Another child? Are you certain?" Zara nodded against his chest. Dr. Miller confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to be sure before I told you. They held each other as darkness fell, making plans and sharing dreams for their expanding family. The ranch would continue to grow alongside them, providing a legacy for their children and perhaps their children's children after them. I was thinking, Clayton said as they finally rose to go inside, if it's a girl, we might name her after your mother. Zara smiled, touched by the suggestion. Clayton Foster. It has a nice sound to it. And if it's another boy, running elk, Zara suggested with a twinkle in her eye. Clayton laughed, pulling her close for a kiss. Perhaps as a middle name, he conceded. Let's not scandalize Beacon Hill entirely. Winter came early that year, with heavy snows isolating the ranch for days at a time. Clayton ensured they were well prepared, with ample supplies and comforts to see them through the cold months. The journey to Boston for Christmas had to be canceled due to Zara's difficult pregnancy, but her parents understood, sending generous gifts for Billy and promises to visit in the spring instead. In February of 1881, their daughter was born during a fierce blizzard that prevented Dr. Miller from reaching the ranch. Once again, Clayton delivered his own child, though this time with more confidence than fear. They named her Alina Rising, combining family tradition with acknowledgement of the friends who had helped them on their journey. As spring transformed the valley once more, the Thorntons finally made their long-promised visit to Sunrise Ranch. Thomas was impressed by the improvements Clayton had implemented with his investment, while Alina delighted in her grandchildren and the surprising comforts of the expanded ranch house. "You've created something remarkable here," Thomas told Clayton as they rode the property boundaries one afternoon. "Something that will last." Clayton nodded, surveying the land that had become so much more than a business to him. "It's not just my doing. Zara has been essential to everything we've built." "You're a fortunate man, Foster," Thomas observed. "Few find such perfect partnerships in life or business." The Thorntons extended their visit through the summer, with Thomas becoming unexpectedly enamored with ranch life, despite his urban background. Alina took to rocking baby Ellie on the porch each evening, singing the same lullabies she had once sung to Zara. Their departure in August was emotional, but lacked the finality of previous goodbyes. The distance between Boston and Montana seemed to have shrunk, not in miles but in significance. Family connections had proven stronger than geography. Life at Sunrise Ranch settled into new rhythms as the children grew. Billy became his father's shadow, learning ranch operations from the time he could sit securely on a horse. Ellie showed early signs of her mother's intellect, devouring books and asking endless questions about the world beyond the valley. By 1885, the ranch had become one of the most successful operations in the territory, with Clayton's innovative breeding programs attracting attention from as far away as Denver and San Francisco. Zara's small school had grown to accommodate 20 children, with a proper building constructed near the main house, and occasionally, a second teacher hired from Livingston to assist. That summer, as they celebrated Billy's 6th birthday, an unexpected visitor arrived at Sunrise Ranch. Joseph, now the foreman overseeing a crew of 12 hands, rode up to the house with news of a woman asking for Clayton at the main road. "Says she knew you years back," Joseph reported. "Wouldn't give her name, just asked to speak with you direct." Clayton frowned, unable to imagine who it might be. "I'll ride down. Tell Zara I'll be back shortly." At the junction where their private road met the main valley route, Clayton found a woman waiting beside a rented buggy. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair pulled severely back and travel-worn clothes that had once been fine. Something about her seemed vaguely familiar, though he couldn't place her. "Mr. Foster," she called as he approached. Yes, he replied cautiously, reining his horse to a stop. Joseph said you were asking for me. The woman stepped forward, studying his face intently. You wouldn't remember me. We met only briefly, years ago in Denver. My name is Zara Thornton. Clayton searched his memory. Denver. He had made cattle sales there occasionally, but couldn't recall meeting this woman. I'm sorry, Miss Lawson. I don't recall our acquaintance. She nodded as if expecting this. It was 8 years ago. I was accompanying my brother on a business trip. We shared a meal at the hotel restaurant. You were quite charming. A vague recollection surfaced: a business dinner with cattle buyers, a young woman at the table, conversation that had extended into the evening. But nothing significant, certainly nothing that would warrant a visit years later. I remember now, Clayton said slowly. But I don't understand why you've sought me out after all this time. Zara Thornton's expression hardened slightly. Because I need to know what kind of man you are before I decide whether to leave my son with his father. Clayton felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. I beg your pardon. My son, she repeated. Your son. Conceived that night in Denver. Shock rendered Clayton momentarily speechless. The claim was impossible. He had shared conversation with this woman, perhaps flirtation. This was before he met Zara, but nothing more. He had not been that kind of man. Miss Lawson, he finally managed, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We may have met in Denver, but we were never intimate. Zara laughed bitterly. Are all men such cowards when confronted with their mistakes? You invited me to your room for a nightcap. We shared more than conversation, Mr. Foster. Clayton shook his head firmly. No, that never happened. I would remember such an encounter, Miss Lawson, and I can state with absolute certainty that it did not occur. For a moment, uncertainty flickered across her face, quickly replaced by renewed conviction. You were drinking heavily that night. Perhaps your memory isn't as reliable as you believe. Even in my youth, I was never so intoxicated as to forget such an encounter, Clayton insisted. And I never invited a woman to my room in Denver or anywhere else until I met my wife. They stood in tense silence, the only sound the occasional stamp of Clayton's horse and the distant call of a meadowlark. Finally, Zara spoke again, her voice lower. Regardless of what you claim to remember, I have a 7-year-old boy who needs his father. My circumstances have changed. I can no longer care for him properly. Clayton's mind raced. 7 years would indeed align with that Denver trip, but the accusation remained false. Yet there was a child involved, a boy who deserved compassion regardless of the truth of his parentage. Where is this boy now? Clayton asked. With the hotel keeper's wife in Livingston. I didn't want to bring him here until I'd spoken with you. Clayton made a decision. I'll ride back to the ranch and return with my wife. We'll all go to Livingston together and sort this out properly. Zara's eyes widened. Your wife? You expect me to discuss this with your wife present? Yes, Clayton said firmly. Zara is my partner in all things. If there's a child who needs help, we'll address it together. He turned his horse back toward the ranch, his mind in turmoil. How would he explain this to Zara? The accusation was false, but would she believe that? And what of the boy? If Zara Thornton abandoned him, what would become of him? Zara was on the porch when he returned, her expression concerned as she noted his troubled face. Clayton, what's wrong? Who was asking for you? Clayton dismounted slowly, trying to organize his thoughts. There was no gentle way to present this situation. A woman named Zara Thornton, she claims. She claims I fathered her son during a business trip to Denver 8 years ago. Zara went very still, her hand gripping the porch railing. Is it true? No, Clayton said immediately, moving to stand before her. Absolutely not. I remember meeting her briefly at a business dinner, but nothing more. There was no intimacy between us." Zara searched his face, years of trust battling against the shock of the moment. "Then why would she make such a claim?" "I don't know. But she says she can no longer care for the boy and wants to leave him with us." "Where is she now?" "Waiting at the main road. The child is in Livingston. I told her I would return with you, that we would go together to see the boy and discuss this properly." Zara was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then, with characteristic resolve, she nodded. "I'll tell Mrs. Peterson to watch Billy and Ellie. We should go immediately." Clayton's relief was profound. She believed him. Despite the outlandish accusation, she trusted his word. "Zara, I swear to you," she stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "I know, Clayton. I know you. Now let's go meet this woman and her son." The ride to the main road was tense, with Zara sitting straight-backed beside Clayton in their buggy. Sarah Lawson watched their approach with visible apprehension, clearly not having expected Clayton to return with his wife. Introductions were awkward and brief. Sarah clearly wanted to speak to Clayton alone, but he insisted that anything said could be said in Zara's presence. Finally, with reluctance, Sarah climbed into her rented buggy, and they formed a small procession heading toward Livingston. At the hotel, they were led to a small room where a boy sat on the bed, a battered tin soldier in his hands. He looked up as they entered, his eyes a startling blue widening at the sight of 3 adults crowding the doorway. "Thomas," Sarah said, her voice gentler than Clayton had yet heard it, "these people have come to meet you." The boy nodded solemnly, setting aside his toy. "Are they the ones you said might take care of me?" Sarah glanced uncomfortably at Clayton and Zara. "We're discussing that, yes." Clayton studied the child carefully. There was something familiar about him, though not in the way Sarah had implied. It wasn't his own features Clayton recognized in the boy, but rather. "Miss Lawson," Zara said suddenly, her voice tight with emerging understanding, "was your brother's name Edward?" Sarah's head snapped toward Zara, surprise evident on her face. "Yes, Edward Lawson. How did you know that?" "Because I met him in Boston, before I came west. We were briefly acquainted through mutual friends." Zara's gaze returned to the boy. "Those are the Lawson eyes. I remember your mother commenting on how all her children had inherited them." Clayton looked more closely at the child, understanding dawning. The boy resembled his uncle, not Clayton. This was why he had seemed vaguely familiar. "Thomas is Edward's son, isn't he?" Zara pressed. "Not Clayton's." Sarah's composure cracked, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Yes," she whispered. "He's Edward's son, my nephew." "Why the deception?" Clayton demanded, keeping his voice low so the boy wouldn't overhear. "Why claim he was mine?" "Because Edward is dead," Sarah replied, tears forming. "Consumption 2 years ago. His wife, this boy's mother, died in childbirth. I've raised Thomas since he was an infant, but now—" She faltered. "Now what?" Zara prompted. "I'm ill," Sarah admitted. "The doctors give me less than a year. I have no other family, no resources to ensure Thomas is cared for after I'm gone." She looked directly at Clayton. "I remembered you from Denver. You were kind, successful. When I learned you had a ranch in Montana, it seemed a possibility." "A possibility based on a lie," Clayton pointed out, though his anger was tempered by compassion for her desperate situation. "I was desperate," Sarah acknowledged. "I still am. Thomas deserves a good home, a family. I thought if you believed he was yours, you would take him in." Zara moved past them to approach the boy, who had been watching their hushed conversation with solemn eyes. She knelt before him, smiling gently. "Hello, Thomas. My name is Zara. That's my husband, Clayton. We have a ranch not far from here with horses and cattle. We also have 2 children, a boy about your age named Billy and a little girl named Ellie." Thomas regarded her cautiously. Aunt Sarah says I might have to live somewhere else soon, because she's sick. Zara nodded, her heart aching for this child facing such uncertainty. Your aunt loves you very much. She wants to make sure you're taken care of. She glanced back at Clayton, a silent question in her eyes. He stepped forward to join her, kneeling beside his wife. Thomas, Clayton said gently, would you like to come stay at our ranch for a while your aunt gets treatment for her illness? The boy looked to Sarah, who managed a tremulous smile. It's a wonderful ranch, Thomas, with lots of room to run and play. Would you stay too? Thomas asked her. Sarah hesitated, then shook her head. No, dear, I need to go where the doctors can help me, but I would visit when I can. It was a kind fiction, Clayton realized. Sarah Lawson had no intention of seeking treatment that she knew would be futile. She was using this time to ensure her nephew's future. I think I would like to see the horses, Thomas said finally. With the simple practicality of children, arrangements were made quickly after that. Sarah would return to her home in St. Louis to put her affairs in order, while Thomas would stay with the Fosters. Legal papers would be drawn up, making the arrangement permanent in the likely event of Sarah's death. As they prepared to leave the hotel, Sarah pulled Clayton aside for a private word. I'm sorry for the deception, she said quietly, but not for the outcome if you'll be good to him. Clayton regarded her solemnly. We'll raise him as our own, you have my word. The introduction of Thomas to Sunrise Ranch was handled with care and sensitivity. Zara explained to Billy and Ellie that Thomas had lost his parents and would be joining their family. Billy, with a child's adaptability, was primarily interested in whether Thomas could ride a horse. Ellie, more perceptive at 4, asked if Thomas was sad about his mama and papa being in heaven. Thomas integrated into their lives with surprising ease, though he remained quiet and watchful at first. Clayton noticed that the boy seemed most at ease in the stables, talking softly to the horses and helping with simple chores. He has a way with animals, Joseph commented one morning, watching Thomas brush down a gentle mare. Natural horseman, that one. Clayton nodded, pride already developing for this boy who was not his by blood but was rapidly becoming his in heart. His father was apparently good with horses too. As weeks passed, Thomas began to speak more, to smile more frequently. He and Billy became inseparable, exploring the ranch together and creating elaborate games that often involved Ellie as either a princess to be rescued or a fearsome outlaw to be captured. Letters came regularly from Sarah in St. Louis, each one a little weaker in handwriting but strong in expressions of gratitude and love for her nephew. Thomas would listen intently as Zara read them aloud, sometimes asking questions about his aunt's health that they answered as honestly as age-appropriate explanations allowed. In December, barely 4 months after Thomas had joined their household, a telegram arrived from St. Louis. Sarah Lawson had passed peacefully in her sleep. The news was delivered gently to Thomas, who received it with a child's complicated grief-sadness mixed with a pragmatic acceptance that sometimes surprised the adults around him. She's with my first mama and papa now, he reasoned, sitting on Clayton's lap before the fire that evening. Aunt Sarah said they would take care of her in heaven like she took care of me. Clayton held the boy close, his own eyes damp. That's right, son, and now we'll take care of you for as long as you need. Thomas looked up at him, those Lawson blue eyes serious. Forever. Forever, Clayton confirmed. The legal adoption was finalized in the spring of 1886, making Thomas officially Thomas Foster. The adjustment to a family of 5 brought both challenges and joys, with the ranch house expanding once more to accommodate their growing needs. Life continued its steady rhythm at Sunrise Ranch. The cattle operation thrived. Zara's school became a recognized educational institution for the valley, and the children grew like prairie wildflowers, strong, vibrant, and deeply rooted in the land that had become their heritage. Thomas, though never forgetting his origins, embraced his place in the Foster family completely. By his 10th birthday, he had developed a particular talent for horse training that even the most experienced hands acknowledged with respect. "That boy can gentle a Mustang faster than anyone I've ever seen," Joseph remarked to Clayton one afternoon as they watched Thomas working patiently with a skittish colt. "Got the touch, he does." Clayton nodded, pride evident in his expression. "He's a natural horseman. Takes after his birth father in that way," according to Sarah's stories. In the summer of 1888, when Thomas had been with them for 3 years, the Fosters received unexpected news that would once again alter the fabric of their family. A letter arrived from a law firm in Denver, addressed to Clayton. "What is it?" Zara asked, noting his surprised expression as he read. Clayton handed her the letter. "It seems Edward Lawson had mining investments that have finally turned profitable. As Thomas's legal guardian, I'm being notified that he's inherited a substantial sum." Zara scanned the document, her eyebrows rising. "This is quite substantial. It could pay for university education, perhaps even establish him in whatever business he might choose someday." "It's his birthright," Clayton agreed. "We'll put it in trust until he's of age." They decided not to tell Thomas about the inheritance immediately, preferring to wait until he was older and could better understand its significance. For now, he was simply their son, brother to Billy and Ellie, beloved member of the family they had created together. That Christmas, as they gathered around the piano, Zara had insisted on having shipped from Boston. "Every proper home needs music," she had declared. Clayton looked at the faces of his family. Zara, still as beautiful to him as the day they met. Billy, now 9 and showing signs of the thoughtful man he would become. Ellie, 6 and fiercely intelligent. And Thomas, 10 and finally comfortable enough to fully laugh and play without the shadow of loss dimming his eyes. This was the family they had built, not all by birth but all by choice and love. As Zara played carols and the children sang with varying degrees of tunelessness, Clayton reflected on the strange, winding path that had brought them all together. The years passed, bringing changes to Sunrise Ranch and the Foster family. Montana achieved statehood in 1889, bringing new opportunities and challenges to the territory they had long called home. The ranch expanded further, with Clayton implementing progressive agricultural methods that established him as a leader in the region's cattle industry. By 1892, Billy was 13, Thomas 14, and Ellie 9. All 3 attended Zara's school, though Billy and Thomas were reaching an age where practical ranch education was becoming equally important. Zara had hired a full-time assistant teacher, allowing her to balance her educational contributions with her role in ranch management. In the spring of that year, as they prepared for the annual cattle drive to the railhead, an unexpected visitor arrived at Sunrise Ranch. A woman in her early 30s, fashionably dressed and traveling alone in a rented buggy, presented herself at the main house one afternoon. "I'm looking for Clayton Foster," she told Zara, who had answered the door. "My name is Rebecca Lawson." Zara felt a chill of apprehension. Another Lawson, after all these years. "My husband is checking the north pasture. He should return shortly. Would you care to wait inside, Miss Lawson?" Rebecca accepted the invitation, stepping into the comfortable main room of the ranch house. Her eyes immediately went to a portrait on the wall, a family photograph taken the previous Christmas showing Clayton, Zara, and the 3 children. "Is that Thomas?" she asked, moving closer to the image. He looks so much like Edward. Zara's guard rose further. You knew Edward Lawson, Rebecca turned, her expression softening. He was my cousin. Sarah was my father's sister. She hesitated, then added, I've only recently learned about Thomas, about what Sarah did. Understanding dawned on Zara. Your family. Thomas's family. Rebecca nodded. Yes, I've come to see him if that's possible, to introduce myself at least. Before Zara could respond, the front door opened and Clayton entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. He stopped abruptly at the sight of their visitor. Clayton, Zara said carefully, this is Rebecca Lawson, Edward's cousin, Thomas's cousin. Clayton's expression shifted from surprise to wariness. Miss Lawson, this is unexpected. Rebecca stepped forward. Mr. Foster, I assure you I haven't come to disrupt your family. I only learned about Thomas recently, when I was settling my father's estate and found correspondence from Sarah. I had no idea Edward had a son, or that Sarah had placed him with your family. Not placed, Clayton corrected gently. Entrusted. Thomas is our son now, legally and in every way that matters. Of course, Rebecca acknowledged quickly. I understand that and I respect it. I only thought. He might want to know he has other family, that his father's people haven't all forgotten him. Zara and Clayton exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years together. Both recognized that this connection to Thomas's birth family could be valuable to him as he grew older and had more questions about his origins. Thomas and the other children will be home from school soon, Zara said finally. Would you like to stay for dinner, Miss Lawson? Meet Thomas in the context of our family. Relief crossed Rebecca's face. I would appreciate that very much, Mrs. Foster. The meeting between Thomas and his cousin was both awkward and touching. The boy, now on the cusp of adolescence, regarded Rebecca with cautious interest as she shared stories about the Lawson family, and presented him with a pocket watch that had belonged to his father. Your father was a good man, Rebecca told him as they sat together on the porch after dinner. Clever with business, kind to everyone, and he loved horses just like you do. Thomas turned the watch over in his hands, tracing the engraved initials. Did you know my mother too, my first mother? Rebecca nodded. Catherine was lovely, quiet but strong. She had the most beautiful singing voice. She hesitated, then added, You have her smile. Clayton and Zara, watching from a respectful distance, saw Thomas straighten slightly at this information, this tangible connection to the parents he had never known. Over the next few days, Rebecca integrated seamlessly into the household routine, careful to respect the family dynamics while offering Thomas glimpses of his heritage. She shared photographs, letters, and stories, creating a bridge between Thomas's past and present. We would welcome your continued correspondence, Zara told her as Rebecca prepared to depart, and visits when you're able. Thomas should know all parts of his family history. Rebecca embraced her warmly. You're remarkable people, you and Clayton. Sarah chose well, even if her methods were unconventional. After Rebecca's departure, they noticed subtle changes in Thomas. He seemed more settled, more confident in his place in the world. The knowledge that he had connections beyond Sunrise Ranch, that his origins were known and acknowledged, appeared to strengthen rather than diminish his bond with the Fosters. I was worried, Clayton admitted to Zara one night as they prepared for bed. That meeting Rebecca might make him feel less ours somehow. Zara shook her head. Love isn't diminished by having more sources, Clayton. If anything, knowing where he comes from helps him better understand where he belongs now. Life continued its forward march. The children grew taller, their interests and personalities becoming more defined. Billy showed Clayton's head for business and Zara's love of learning, often discussing ranch improvements and innovations he'd read about in agricultural journals. Thomas's gift with horses developed into a true vocation, with ranchers from across the state seeking his expertise with difficult animals. Ellie, not to be outdone by her brothers, demonstrated both academic brilliance and a surprising talent for veterinary matters, often assisting when animals needed care. In 1896, as Billy prepared to attend university in Denver, the first Foster to pursue higher education, an unexpected letter arrived from Boston. Zara Thornton had passed away after a brief illness. Thomas Thornton, now in his 70s, wrote that he was considering selling the Boston house and moving west to be closer to his family. "Father alone in Montana," Zara mused, reading the letter aloud to Clayton. "It's difficult to imagine." "He's been visiting regularly for 15 years, Clayton pointed out, "and he's always seemed comfortable here." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "True, and having him close would be wonderful for the children, especially Ellie. She adores her grandfather." Thomas Thornton arrived in the autumn, bringing with him family heirlooms, investment portfolios, and an energy that belied his advancing years. He purchased a comfortable house in Livingston, but spent much of his time at Sunrise Ranch, particularly after Billy departed for university. "This place gives me purpose," he explained to Clayton as they inspected a new breeding bull. "In Boston, I was just another retired banker. Here I can be useful." And useful he was, bringing his financial acumen to the expanding ranch operations and his grandfather's wisdom to the growing children. He took particular interest in Ellie's education, encouraging her interest in medicine and arranging for special tutoring in sciences. "The world is changing," he told Zara and Clayton. "Women like our Ellie will have opportunities we can scarcely imagine. She should be prepared." By 1897, with Billy in his second year of university and Thomas established as the ranch's premier horse trainer at 18, their family had evolved into a multi-generational enterprise. Sunrise Ranch had become not just a successful cattle operation but a respected horse breeding facility as well, with Thomas's trained stock commanding premium prices throughout the region. That summer brought another pivotal moment in their family story. A telegram arrived from Denver. Billy was bringing a young woman home to meet the family. Her name was Catherine Miller, a doctor's daughter he had met through university connections. "Our son is courting," Clayton marveled, shaking his head as he read the telegram. "When did he get old enough for that?" Zara laughed, though her eyes held a touch of wistfulness. "Time moves differently when you're watching children grow. Each day seems eternal, but suddenly years have passed." Billy and Catherine arrived on a bright June day, their obvious affection for each other immediately apparent. Catherine was intelligent and warm, clearly entranced by Sunrise Ranch and the family Billy had described so often. "Your son speaks of nothing but this place and all of you," she told Clayton and Zara during a moment alone. "I feel I know you already." As the visit progressed, it became clear that Billy's intentions were serious. On their final evening, after Catherine had retired for the night, he approached his parents on the porch where so many family discussions had taken place over the years. "I'm going to ask Catherine to marry me," he announced without preamble. "Not immediately, we'll finish university first. But I wanted you to know." Clayton embraced his son, emotion making words difficult. "She's a fine young woman, Billy. You've chosen well." "Like father, like son," Billy replied with a smile toward Zara. Later, as Clayton and Zara prepared for bed, he found her gazing out the window toward the mountains, moonlight silvering her still dark hair. "What are you thinking?" he asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist. I'm thinking about cycles, she replied softly. About how life circles back on itself. Our son is beginning his own journey now, just as we did 20 years ago. Clayton pressed a kiss to her temple. Has it really been 20 years? Nearly. She turned in his arms to face him. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I rode up to your door in that storm, and sometimes it feels like we've always been here, always been us. The best decision I ever made was inviting a rain-soaked schoolteacher to take shelter, Clayton murmured against her hair. The best decision I ever made was accepting, Zara countered, reaching up to trace the familiar lines of his face. Thomas's 21st birthday in February of 1899 marked another milestone. Clayton and Zara presented him with the documentation of his inheritance from Edward Lawson, now grown substantial through wise investments overseen by Thomas Thornton. This is your birthright, Clayton explained, as Thomas examined the papers with astonishment. We've held it in trust until you were of age. It's a fortune, Thomas said, looking up with bewilderment. What am I supposed to do with this? Zara smiled, touching his shoulder gently. Whatever you choose, Thomas, it's yours to build your future as you see fit. After consideration, Thomas decided to use part of his inheritance to establish a formal horse breeding and training operation as a separate but connected enterprise to the main ranch. The Clayton Foster Horse Company was born, with stables and training facilities constructed on the eastern portion of the ranch property. By the turn of the century, Sunrise Ranch had evolved into a thriving family enterprise encompassing cattle ranching, horse breeding, and even a small educational initiative, as Zara's school gained regional recognition for its progressive methods. Billy, now graduated and married to Catherine, had returned to help manage the expanding cattle business, building a home of his own on the western edge of the property. Ellie, at 17, was preparing to attend medical school in Denver, supported enthusiastically by her grandfather and parents. And Thomas, though maintaining the Foster name and identity, had found a way to honor his Lawson heritage through his work and business. His reputation as a horse trainer had spread throughout the West, bringing clients from as far as California and Texas. In the summer of 1901, as they celebrated Ellie's acceptance to medical school, Clayton found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Standing on the porch of the house that had grown alongside their family, he watched his 3 children, 2 by birth and 1 by choice, all equally beloved, laughing together as they prepared for an evening ride. Zara joined him, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity of decades together. "Happy?" she asked simply. Clayton squeezed her hand. "Beyond anything I could have imagined that day you rode up my drive. We've been fortunate," she agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Not just fortunate," Clayton corrected gently. "Blessed." The years continued to flow, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Billy and Catherine welcomed their first child in 1902, a daughter they named Zara Foster, continuing family traditions. Thomas Thornton, despite advancing age, remained active in ranch affairs and delighted in his great-granddaughter, often telling her stories of Boston and the family's history. Ellie thrived in medical school, her letters home full of excitement about new discoveries and challenges. She wrote particularly of a professor who specialized in veterinary medicine, suggesting that she might combine her medical training with her love of animals upon her return to Montana. Thomas, while dedicated to his horse business, remained unmarried into his mid-20s, prompting occasional gentle teasing from his siblings about his bachelor status. "I'm waiting for someone who loves this land as much as I do," he would reply with a grin. Not everyone is as fortunate as Billy, finding their match at university. In the spring of 1904, Thomas's waiting ended when he met Julia Harrington, the daughter of a wealthy Denver businessman who had come to purchase horses for his Colorado ranch. Julia, unlike many women of her social standing, was an accomplished horsewoman with definite opinions about breeding and training. She and Thomas spent hours in spirited discussion, their mutual respect quickly evolving into deeper feelings. By summer's end, Thomas had proposed and Julia had accepted, with a wedding planned for the following spring. "She's perfect for him," Zara observed to Clayton after meeting the forthright young woman. "Strong enough to match his stubborn streak, but gentle where it counts." Clayton nodded, recognizing in Julia some of the same qualities that had drawn him to Zara all those years ago. "The Foster men seem to have good taste in wives," he remarked with a smile. As Thomas and Julia's wedding approached, bringing the extended Lawson and Harrington families to Sunrise Ranch, Clayton found himself increasingly reflective. At 52, he was still actively involved in ranch operations, but increasingly content to let the next generation take the lead in day-to-day management. One evening, as he and Zara walked along the creek where they had once picnicked on their first anniversary, he voiced thoughts that had been forming for some time. "I've been thinking about the future," he began, "about making some changes." Zara glanced at him curiously. "What kind of changes?" "I'm considering stepping back from daily management, letting Billy take over as general manager, with Thomas continuing to run the horse operation. Maybe we could travel a bit, see some of those places you used to talk about." Zara stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Are you unhappy with ranch life, Clayton?" He shook his head quickly. "No, not at all. This land, this life, it's everything to me. But I'm thinking about us, about having time together that isn't defined by work and responsibility." Understanding softened Zara's expression. "After all these years, you still want adventures with me?" "Always," Clayton said simply, taking her hands in his. "From that first storm to whatever lies ahead, there's no one else I'd rather journey with." Thomas and Julia's wedding in May 1905 was a joyous occasion that brought together the extended family and community that had grown around Sunrise Ranch. Ellie returned from medical school for the event, bringing news of her own plans to open a practice in Livingston that would serve both human and animal patients, the first of its kind in the region. As summer progressed into fall, Clayton began implementing his plan to step back from daily management, gradually transferring responsibilities to Billy while maintaining oversight of major decisions. This transition created space for the travel he had proposed, beginning with a month-long journey to San Francisco that October. For Zara, who had not left Montana for extended periods since their Boston visit decades earlier, the trip was a delightful rediscovery of the wider world. They attended the theater, visited museums, and walked for hours along the bay, talking and dreaming like the young couple they had once been. "We should do this more often," Zara declared as they prepared to return home. "Perhaps visit the East Coast next spring. Ellie would love to show us Denver, and we could continue on to Boston to see the old Thornton house." Clayton agreed readily, discovering that these breaks from ranch routine rejuvenated his appreciation for both travel and home. Their pattern of spending several months at Sunrise Ranch, followed by weeks of exploration, became a new chapter in their life together. By 1907, their extended family continued to grow. Billy and Catherine welcomed a son, Clayton Thomas Foster, giving young Alina a brother and continuing family naming traditions. Thomas and Julia announced their own first pregnancy, with a child expected in early 1908. Even Ellie, dedicated primarily to her growing medical practice, had begun a courtship with a young lawyer from Bozeman who frequently found reasons to visit Livingston. Thomas Thornton, now approaching 80 but still sharp of mind, took particular joy in these developments. 5 generations of Thorntons and Fosters, he remarked one evening as the family gathered for dinner. From Boston banking to Montana ranching, quite a legacy we've built. The patriarch's words resonated with Clayton as he looked around the table at the family. They had created biological children and chosen ones. Spouses who had become essential parts of the fabric, grandchildren who carried forward their blended heritage. In January 1908, as a bitter cold snap held the valley in its grip, Thomas and Julia welcomed their son. They named him Edward Clayton Foster, honoring both Thomas's birth father and the man who had raised him as his own. When Clayton first held his newest grandson, something profound and unexpected moved through him, a recognition of how lives intertwine across generations, how family transcends blood and circumstance. This child carried the Lawson blood that Thomas did, yet was as much a Foster as any of them. "He's perfect," Clayton whispered, tracing a gentle finger along the infant's cheek. "Absolutely perfect." Thomas watched his adoptive father with the baby, emotion evident in his expression. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about Sarah, about how she came here all those years ago." Clayton looked up, surprised. Thomas rarely spoke of Sarah Lawson or the circumstances that had brought him to Sunrise Ranch. "Her methods were wrong," Thomas continued. "The lie she told, but her instinct about where I belonged." He paused, gathering himself. "She couldn't have chosen better parents for me if she'd searched the whole world." Tears filled Clayton's eyes as the meaning of his son's words sank in. "Thomas, you and Zara gave me everything," Thomas went on, his own voice thick with emotion. "A home, a family, values to live by. You could have turned Sarah away that day, sent us both back to St. Louis. But you didn't. You opened your hearts and your home." Clayton carefully passed the baby back to Thomas, then embraced his grown son with all the love that had built between them over the years. "You were always meant to be ours," he said softly. "From the moment I saw you in that hotel room, I knew it." As if summoned by the emotional moment, Zara appeared in the doorway, her eyes taking in the scene, her husband and their adopted son embracing beside the cradle of a new generation. She crossed to join them, completing the circle. 3 generations of foster men, she observed, touching the baby's tiny hand. Each one a blessing beyond measure. Later that evening, as a January snowfall transformed the ranch into a gleaming wonderland, Clayton stood at the window of their bedroom, watching the familiar landscape disappear beneath a blanket of white. 30 years had passed since he had watched another snowfall from this same window. Alone and unaware of how his life would change, Zara joined him, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind. "What are you thinking about so intently, my love?" Clayton covered her hands with his own. "About time. About how years pass and everything changes, yet some things remain constant." "Like what?" she prompted, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "Like this land, like family." He turned to face her, cupping her beloved face in his hands. "Like us." Zara's eyes, still as bright and intelligent as when she'd first ridden through that storm 3 decades earlier, held his gaze. "Especially us," she agreed softly. As they stood together in the quiet of their room, the legacy they had built, Sunrise Ranch, their children, their grandchildren, continued its life around them. The years had indeed passed, bringing joys and sorrows, challenges and triumphs. But through it all, they had remained constants for each other, their love the foundation upon which everything else had been built. And in a room across the ranch house, Thomas Foster, once a frightened boy in a Livingston hotel room, now a proud father himself, held his newborn son and understood completely the tears he had seen in Clayton's eyes. For love, when given freely and fully, creates bonds that neither time nor circumstance can diminish. It builds families not just of blood but of heart. It creates homes that shelter generations. In the end, that was the true legacy of Sunrise Ranch, not the cattle or the horses or the land itself, but the love that had transformed strangers into family, and a simple ranch house into the heart of a dynasty that would continue long after those who founded it were gone.